My name is Franklin Mercer. My friends call me Frank. For 42 years, I had the most interesting job you've never heard of. I was a forensic accountant for the Internal Revenue Service. My world was numbers. Not dry, boring numbers, but the kind that tell stories. Greedy stories. Careless stories. Sometimes bloody stories. I was the guy they brought in when the regular agents hit a wall, when the money trail went cold. I found the hidden pattern. The one ledger that didn't square. I've been retired for 10 years. I live in a cedar-shingled house on Lake Sammamish, just outside Seattle. It's quiet. The kind of quiet you earn. My daughter, Sarah, thinks it's too quiet. She worries. She's a nurse over at Swedish Hospital, and she's got that caregiver's instinct. She calls it checking in. I call it a weekly interrogation. How's the head, Dad? Sleeping okay. You remember your pills? The head is fine. Or it was. I'll get to that. My routine is my anchor. Coffee at 6. The Seattle Times crossword. Ink. Never pencil by 7. A walk along the water, rain or shine. In the afternoon, I work. Retirement doesn't mean your brain stops. I do one pro bono job a year for the Washington State Attorney General's office. Old habits. They send me cold cases with a financial angle. Charity fraud. Embezzlement. That kind of thing. Keeps the gears oiled. This year, I picked the Lakeside Arts Foundation. You've probably heard of it. They fund museums, theaters, youth programs, black tie galas, the whole 9 yards. The chairman is a man named Julian Thorne. Silver hair, good teeth, always in the society pages. Pillar. The request from the AG was routine. A whisper from a former board member about financial irregularities. Probably nothing, but it needed a look. So, for 6 weeks, that's what I did. I looked. They sent over digital records. Years of them. I set up in my home office, the room with the best view of the lake. My sanctuary. Spreadsheets on one screen, bank statements on another. It was slow, methodical work. The kind I love. First, it was clean. Too clean. Donations in, grants out. Everything by the book. But something, it didn't sit right. It was like listening to a perfectly tuned orchestra and hearing one violin, just a hair off key. You can't point to it yet, but you know it's there. The off-key note was a series of consulting fees and special project costs. They were always just under the threshold that would trigger a deeper audit. They went to a handful of limited liability companies with generic names. Northwest Cultural Strategies. Evergreen Arts Management. I'd seen this dance before. Shell companies. They're like Russian nesting dolls for money. I started cross-referencing. Dates, amounts, board approval stamps. The pattern began to emerge. It was a siphon. A gentle, sophisticated siphon. Millions of dollars, diverted over a decade. Not in a greedy gulp, but in careful, patient sips. 2 days before everything went black, I found the keystone. A payment from Evergreen Arts Management to a property holding company in the Cayman Islands. A company that, after some very discreet digging through some very old contacts, I linked to Julian Thorne's nearly bankrupt private equity firm. It wasn't just embezzlement. It was a lifeline. The foundation was bleeding out to keep Julian Thorne's empire afloat. I remember the feeling. Not excitement. Dread. Cold, heavy stone in my gut. I'd seen men like Thorne before. Their reputation isn't just their image. It's their armor. Their currency. Threaten that, and you're not threatening their money. You're threatening their soul. I picked up the phone. I called Catherine Blythe, my old liaison at the AG's office. Got her voicemail. Catherine, it's Frank Mercer. I found it. It's not embezzlement. It's a masterclass. I need to see you in person. Tomorrow if you can. Don't talk to anyone at the foundation yet. This one has teeth. I hung up. I looked out at the lake. The late afternoon sun was cutting through the clouds, turning the water to hammered silver. It was beautiful. I should have felt satisfied. I'd solved the puzzle. Instead, I felt watched. I shook it off. An old man's paranoia. I made a pot of tea. I was standing at the kitchen window, waiting for the water to boil, when I saw a car I didn't recognize parked down the street. A dark sedan. It wasn't there for my neighbor, old Mrs. Gable. She drives a Buick the size of a boat. This was something else. I couldn't see the driver. The kettle whistled. I poured my tea. When I looked back, the car was gone. See, that's the thing they don't tell you about finding secrets. For a little while, the secret finds you right back. It sits in your quiet house. It watches from a dark sedan. It waits. I just didn't know how little time it would wait. That night, I went to bed early. Read a little. Fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof. The last thing I remember clearly is the smell of the pine trees through my cracked window, and the weight of the case settling on my mind. The next thing I knew, I was drowning in the dark, and the world was trying to tell me I'd had a stroke. The dark wasn't peaceful. It was thick, a suffocating syrup filling my ears, my mouth, my lungs. There was a distant electronic chirping, a sound you hear in hospitals. I tried to open my eyes. The light was a white-hot needle. I shut them fast. Voices swam above me, muffled, as if I were deep underwater. Found him in his study, unresponsive. Daughter says he has a history of hypertension. Pupils are pinpoint check for opioids. No, I tried to say. No history. Not like this. My mouth wouldn't work. Felt stuffed with wool. The fragments came slowly, gluing themselves into a nightmare. Sarah's face, pale and terrified, leaning into my blurred vision. Dad? Dad? Can you hear me? The shuddering ride in the ambulance. The ceiling lights streaking past like comets. The frantic beep of the heart monitor becoming the drumbeat of this new, horrible reality. I was in the intensive care unit at Swedish. My body was a dead weight attached to a symphony of machines. An oxygen cannula pricked my nostrils. An IV line snaked from my hand. A catheter, well, some dignities are the first to go. The official story, the one they were piecing together without me, was simple. Franklin Mercer, 76, suffered a catastrophic hemorrhagic stroke. Found by his daughter. A tragic, but not unexpected medical event for a man of his age. But my mind, the part they were writing off as damaged, was screaming. A stroke doesn't start with a sharp, burning prick on the side of your neck, just below your ear. A stroke doesn't flood your veins with a sudden, warm paralysis, a tidal wave of numbness that started at that exact point and rolled down your body before you could even gasp. I remembered that. The prick. Like a bee sting. Then the warmth. Then the dark. I'd been in my leather armchair, reviewing a final spreadsheet. The house was silent. And then, the sting. I jerked my hand up, swatted at my neck like you would at a mosquito. My fingers came away dry. No blood. And then the world softened at the edges, tilting on its axis. I tried to tell them. When the fog lifted enough for me to slur words, I grabbed Sarah's wrist with a strength that surprised us both. Neck, I rasped. Prick. On my neck. She looked at me with such profound, heart-breaking pity. It's okay, Dad. You're confused. The doctors say that's normal. The doctor, a young intensivist named Sharma with kind eyes and a tired smile, was gentler but firm. Mr. Mercer, what you're describing can often be a neurological sensation preceding a cerebrovascular event. A kind of aura. It's not uncommon. They'd examined me, of course, but in the chaos of saving my life, intubating me, scanning my brain, stabilizing my crashing blood pressure, a tiny puncture mark on an elderly man's wrinkled skin wasn't a priority. It was a footnote, if it was even seen at all. It was Detective Sandra Ruiz who saw it. She entered my room on the third day. I was more alert, propped up on pillows, the headache a constant, dull axe behind my eyes. She was in her mid-40s, with a calm, settled energy and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She didn't wear a uniform, just a charcoal blazer over a sensible blouse. She introduced herself softly, showed her badge. Mr. Mercer, I'm with the King County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit. Your daughter requested we take a look. She's concerned. She thinks I'm losing my marbles, I said, my voice still gravelly. A faint smile touched Ruiz's lips. She thinks someone might have hurt you. She says you're the most careful man she knows. That you don't just have strokes. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket. Mind if I ask you a few questions? She walked me through it all. My routine. The Arts Foundation case. The phone call to Catherine Blythe. The dark sedan. She listened, her pen moving slowly, not with skepticism, but with a deep, professional absorption. This prick on your neck, she said finally, putting her notebook down. Can you show me exactly where? I pointed. She came closer, her movements respectful, non-threatening. May I? I nodded. She put on a pair of reading glasses and leaned in, using a penlight from her pocket. Her breath was still. She examined the spot for a long 10 seconds. Did the doctors mention anything about this? She asked, straightening up. They said it was nothing. An aura. Ruiz's expression didn't change, but something hardened in her gaze. I'm no doctor, Mr. Mercer, but I've seen injection sites before. This looks like a hypodermic puncture. Very fine gauge. It's almost healed over. She took out her phone and took a picture with my permission. I'm going to have a forensic nurse come take a proper look. And I'm going to request your full toxicology panel from the lab. They said it was a stroke. I insisted, a desperate hope clawing in my chest. The symptoms can be similar, Ruiz said, her voice low and even. Especially with certain synthetic opioids. They cause respiratory depression, pinpoint pupils, coma. To an ER team focused on saving a life, elderly man found unresponsive points to a natural cause. It's the easiest answer. She met my eyes. But you're telling me you're not an easy man, Mr. Mercer. And my job is to listen. That was the moment the world shifted. The story changed from a private medical tragedy to a potential crime scene. My house, my sanctuary, was now sealed with yellow tape. My computer, my files on the Lakeside Arts Foundation were logged into evidence. The quiet sip of the Foundation's funds had just been echoed by a near-silent, near-perfect attempt on my life. Someone had tried to delete me, and they'd almost used my own aging body as the excuse. As Ruiz left to make her calls, I stared out the hospital window at the gray Seattle sky. The cold, logical part of my brain, the part that had built my career, was already working. The attack happened within 48 hours of my call to Catherine Blythe. The killer knew I was close, knew I had the proof. That meant they had access. To my call? To my house? To Catherine's office? The prick on my neck wasn't just a wound. It was a message. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a precise clinical termination. An audit of a different kind. They'd balanced the ledger. They'd just miscalculated the dose. The next few days were a strange limbo. A parade of professionals. The forensic nurse confirmed Detective Ruiz's suspicion, a high likelihood of a subcutaneous injection site. The toxicology report came back, a dense page of chemical names and numbers. Dr. Sharma brought it in, his earlier kindness replaced by a somber, professional gravity. Mr. Mercer, you were correct, he said, pointing to a line on the report. We found traces of carfentanil. It's a synthetic opioid, incredibly potent, used to sedate large animals. A dose the size of a grain of salt could be fatal to a human. Your levels were astronomical. The fact you're alive is... He shook his head, a medical marvel bumping against his clinical training. It's a testament to your underlying health. Carfentanil. The word hung in the sterilized air. This wasn't a street drug. This was specialized. Controlled. And the stroke? I asked. The brain scan shows minor, age-consistent ischemia, he said. Likely a result of the respiratory depression and hypotension caused by the toxin. It was a consequence, not the cause. So there it was, in black and white. Not an act of God. An act of man. Detective Ruiz became a regular visitor. She worked with a quiet, relentless focus. She'd pull a chair up to my bedside, update me in that calm, even tone. It was a courtesy, I knew. I was the victim, but I was also, in her eyes, a source. A repository of details about a world of numbers and secrets she was just beginning to map. We've secured your files from the AG's office, she told me one afternoon. And we've interviewed Catherine Blythe. She confirmed your voicemail. She never spoke to anyone about it. The only other person who knew the specifics of your assignment was the case manager who sent you the files. Who's that? I asked. A man named Robert Kincaid. Bobby. Been with the AG's office for 15 years. Middle management. She glanced at her notes. He was very shaken up. Said he admired your work. Said he heard about your stroke and felt terrible for assigning you the case. Did he now? The adjuster in me perked up. Protests of innocence, especially ones that came unsolicited, were always a yellow flag. He has an alibi for the estimated time of the attack, Ruiz continued. He was in a budget meeting with 6 other people from 3 to 5 p.m. Cell phone pings place him in the Olympia office. Solid, but not ironclad. He could have arranged it. The thought hung between us, unspoken. What about the foundation? I asked. Ruiz's expression tightened. Just a fraction. We've begun preliminary interviews. Julian Thorne was shocked and devastated. He offered his full cooperation. Called you a national treasure. She delivered the quote with perfect, flat neutrality. His son, Dr. Eris Thorne, was equally concerned. He's an anesthesiologist at Virginia Mason. He asked detailed questions about your treatment, specific antidotes used, ventilation protocols. Seemed professionally interested. Too interested? An anesthesiologist. A man who worked with potent, precise sedatives for a living. The pieces, vague and disconnected, were beginning to drift on the board. And Eleanor Vance? The director. The most visibly upset of the 3, Ruiz said. She said the foundation was her life's work. That the mere suggestion of impropriety was a dagger to the heart. She was adamant that you must have misunderstood the records. Classic deflection. Protect the institution at all costs. Ruiz leaned forward, her voice dropping. Frank, I need to understand the money. Your daughter said you could explain it better than anyone. This siphon. How did it work? Why wouldn't their own accountants have caught it? It was the question I'd been waiting for. I pushed myself up on the pillows. It was elegant, I said, the familiar language of my trade bringing a grim focus. They didn't steal a lump sum. That leaves a hole. They created a pressure release valve. The foundation gets a $5 million donation. The books show it all going to a community outreach initiative. But that initiative subcontracts to Northwest Cultural Strategies for consulting at $1.9 million. Northwest then pays Evergreen Arts Management $1.8 for project management. Evergreen kicks $1.7 to an offshore holding company. Each step takes its cut, layers the paper trail, stays below audit triggers. By the time it lands in the Caymans, it's clean, untraceable cash. Their own accountants would just see approved expenses to legitimate-sounding vendors. You'd need to track the money across all the entities, see the circular flow. That's what I did. Ruiz was writing fast. And this Cayman company is tied to Julian Thorne's private firm? It's the anchor, I said. The final destination. Thorne's other ventures are drowning. This was the quiet, steady bailout. Not to make him richer. To keep him from going under. It's about survival. She stopped writing. Looked at me. So the motive, it's not just greed. It's panic. I nodded. A drowning man will pull down anyone who gets close. Even someone just trying to read the water level. The room fell quiet. The only sound the hum of the IV pump. The scope of it was settling in. This wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. It was a defense of an entire, crumbling world. We'll need to subpoena the Foundation's full board minutes, the bank records for all these shell companies, Ruiz said, thinking out loud. It's a mountain of paper. It'll take weeks. He knows you're coming now, I said quietly. The carfentanil didn't work. He'll be covering his tracks, erasing the digital trail, pressuring witnesses. He, Ruiz asked, one eyebrow raised. Or she, I conceded. But this feels paternal, protective of a kingdom. Ruiz didn't agree or disagree. She just closed her notebook. Get some rest, Frank. We're just getting started. After she left, I didn't rest. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing down pathways of numbers and logic. Ruiz was a good detective. Thorough. By the book. But she was facing a phantom. A crime with no forced entry. No murder weapon. No obvious suspect. Just a needle prick and a mountain of financial data. The killer had thought of everything. They'd chosen a method that mimicked nature. They'd bet on everyone seeing an old man's body and writing the story for them. They'd only made one mistake. They'd bet against my mind. And against a detective who looked at a puncture wound and saw not an old man's confusion, but a fingerprint. The game was on. And for the first time since I woke up in the dark, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a consultant on my own case. The pieces were in motion. Now we had to see which one would break first. The pressure started to build, slow and steady, like a weather front moving in. Detective Ruiz and her partner, a laconic veteran named Ben Miller, became fixtures in my world. They'd update me, ask clarifying questions about fiduciary law and offshore banking, things that made Miller's eyes glaze over, and then head back into the field. The investigation was a two-pronged attack. The financial forensics team was tearing apart the Foundation's records with a fine-toothed comb, following the map I'd drawn. The criminal side was interviewing everyone who'd been in my orbit. And that's when Bobby Kincaid started to crack. It began with small things. Ruiz mentioned he'd called her twice to clarify his statement, adding unnecessary details about his whereabouts. Then, the forensic accountants found something. A series of encrypted emails, clumsily hidden on the AG's server, between a user named Verifier12 and an account linked to one of the Foundation's shell companies. The content was technical discussions of audit thresholds, reporting schedules. The digital trail for Verifier12 was routed through a series of proxies. But the metadata had a tiny flaw. The emails were often sent during times when the AG's office internal network showed Robert Kincaid was logged into his workstation, and his personal cell phone was idle. It was circumstantial, but it was a thread. The real blow came from an unexpected source. The security system at my own community's front gate. Ruiz had requested the logs for the day of the attack. Most entries were familiar: neighbors, delivery trucks, the landscapers. But one vehicle, a generic white van registered to a defunct appliance repair company, had entered at 3:15 p.m., citing service call for Mercer. It exited at 4:05 p.m. It scheduled no service. The gate camera was low resolution, but it caught the driver. A figure in a baseball cap and sunglasses, wearing an oversized work jacket. They kept their head down, but as they handed the ID back to the guard, the camera caught a glimpse of a wrist. On it was a distinctive watch, a chunky, digital G-Shock with a bright orange bezel. Ruiz showed me a still image on her tablet, zoomed in on that wrist. Mean anything to you? I shook my head. No, but it's not a watch a surgeon would wear in the operating room. Too hard to sterilize. She nodded, a flicker of something in her eyes. She already knew. They brought Bobby Kincaid in for a voluntary interview. He agreed, sweating through his department store polo shirt. Ruiz, in a windowless room at the sheriff's office, was polite but relentless. She didn't mention the emails at first. She talked about the van. The watch. She asked about his financial situation. Kincaid, a man with a kind, tired face, unraveled. He talked about his son's leukemia, the mountain of copays, the experimental treatments not covered by insurance. His voice broke. You do what you have to for your kid, he whispered, staring at the table. Then Ruiz slid a photo of the watch across the table. This look familiar, Bobby? He went bone white. He stammered. He said it was a common watch. Ruiz then presented the email metadata, linking the Verifier12 account to his workstation. She explained how leaking audit timelines and focus areas could be worth a great deal of money to someone trying to hide a fraud. Kincaid crumbled. He didn't confess to the attack. He confessed to being a leak. He said he'd been approached online over a year ago by someone who knew about his son. They offered money for routine, non-classified information about cold case financial reviews. He'd taken it. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Felt like a victimless crime. Just giving a heads up to some rich guy so he could get his books in order. Did you tell them about Frank Mercer? Ruiz asked, her voice ice cold. Kincaid's head dropped into his hands. I had to. The request for the foundation files came across my desk. I flagged it for them. They seemed very interested. Asked for his name, his address, his routine. I gave them the public stuff. I swear, I never thought. I thought they just wanted to talk to him. To convince him to drop it. Who is they, Bobby? Miller asked from the corner. I don't know. It was all encrypted. They called themselves the curator. The money came in cryptocurrency. But he'd kept one thing. Panic move. He'd saved the Bitcoin wallet address of the last payment. The digital forensic team traced it. The wallet had made a recent, sizable withdrawal to an account held by a corporate entity that was a subsidiary of Julian Thorne's private equity firm. It was the connection. The golden thread between the fraud and the attack on me, running right through the heart of the Attorney General's own office. The case against Julian Thorne seemed to crystallize in an instant. The financial motive was massive. He had the means, he could hire anyone. He had the opportunity, he knew I was on the trail from Kincaid. The watch, the van, it was all hired muscle. A professional hit, ordered by a desperate man to protect his empire. The sheriff's office moved fast. They obtained arrest warrants for Julian Thorne for solicitation of murder and the underlying fraud. The news broke like a thunderclap. Pillar of society arrested in poison plot. The media camped outside the Thorne mansion, a modern castle on the shores of Lake Washington. I watched it on the small TV in my hospital room. They showed Julian, handcuffed over his tailored overcoat, being led down his grand front steps. His face was a mask of outraged dignity. He looked straight at the cameras and said, loud and clear, "This is a monstrous lie. I have nothing but respect for Mr. Mercer. I will be vindicated." But the world saw a wealthy fraudster, a man who'd steal from charity and kill to cover it up. It was a perfect, satisfying story. The pieces fit. The public was outraged. The DA was talking about life in prison. Detective Ruiz came to see me after the arrest. She looked tired but satisfied. "It's not a full close," she said. "We still need to find the actual hitter, the person in the van. But with Thorne's resources, we'll flip someone. We'll get there." I should have felt relief, vindication. But something itched at the back of my brain, a number that wouldn't balance. "The method?" I said slowly, not looking at the TV where Thorne's face was frozen in a perp walk. "Carfentanil, a hypodermic needle. That's intimate, surgical. A hired killer usually goes for a gun, or a blunt instrument. Something quick, impersonal, from a distance." Ruiz sat down. "Thorne's son is an anesthesiologist. Maybe he sourced the drug. Maybe he even advised on the method. Maybe," I conceded, but the logic felt forced. A rich man ordering a hit doesn't specify the pharmacology. He just says, make it look natural. The choice of carfentanil spoke of a specific clinical knowledge, personal signature. And then there was Thorne's performance. The outrage on the steps. It didn't feel like the panic of a caught man. It felt like the fury of a wronged one. "You're not convinced?" Ruiz stated, reading my face. "The math is right," I said. "But in my experience, when the answer seems too neat, you've probably missed a variable." Just then, Ruiz's phone buzzed. She looked at it, her brow furrowing. She listened for a moment, then stood up. "I have to go. Thorne's lawyer is at the station. He's making a statement." "What kind of statement?" Her gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her steady eyes. "He's providing an alibi for the time of the attack. A solid one. And he's not the only one." The door swished shut behind her, leaving me in the quiet room. The TV was now showing analysts debating the case. The narrative was set. Julian Thorne was the villain. But on the spreadsheet in my mind, a new column had just opened. The numbers in the Thorne column were strong. But if his alibi held, then the sum was wrong. And we'd been looking at the wrong line item all along. The case, which had seemed so close to wrapped up, was suddenly wide open again. Julian Thorne's alibi wasn't just solid. It was granite. At the exact time the white van was entering my community, he was in a closed door, 2-hour meeting with the governor, the mayor of Seattle, and 3 senior banking executives. It was about a public-private infrastructure project. There were security logs, staff witnesses, and even a group photo timestamped at 3:45 p.m. He couldn't have ordered the hit in real time. His lawyer, a razor-sharp woman in a suit that cost more than my car, presented it all with cold, triumphant precision. But the money trail from Kincaid to Thorne's subsidiary was still there. It was a contradiction that hung in the air of the sheriff's office like a bad smell. Detective Ruiz laid it out for me the next day, frustration tightening the lines around her mouth. Thorne admits the subsidiary made the payment, but his story is that it was a consulting fee for market analysis, routed through the Cayman entity for tax purposes. He says the Bitcoin wallet address is a coincidence, that the curator must have somehow intercepted the payment instruction and substituted their own. He's calling it a frame-up. Do you believe that? I asked from my new perch in a physical therapy gym, slowly squeezing a stress ball. It's thin, she admitted. But his alibi means he didn't pull the trigger, physically or metaphorically, at that moment. So if he's guilty, he had to have set it in motion earlier. Or she let the word hang. Or someone else is using his fraud as cover. I finished. The stress ball was limp in my hand. The payment to Kincaid is too obvious. A direct link from a secret bribe to Thorne's own company? A man who built a decade-long hidden siphon doesn't make a mistake that crude. Unless he wanted it found. Ruiz's eyes narrowed. You think he's being set up? I think we subtracted wrong, I said, the familiar ache of a puzzle taking hold. We saw money plus motive plus opportunity equals Thorne. But what if the money in Kincaid's pocket wasn't Thorne's motive? What if it was someone else's tool? The investigation pivoted painfully. The media, having crowned Thorne the villain, now buzzed with theories of a shadowy conspirator. The focus shifted away from the chairman and back into the ecosystem of the foundation. And that's when Eleanor Vance, the loyal director, broke. She requested a meeting with Ruiz. They met in a quiet interview room. Eleanor, usually so composed, looked shattered. Her hands trembled around a paper cup of water. She didn't need a lawyer, she said. She needed to clear her conscience. Julian didn't know, she whispered, her voice ragged, about the specifics. He knew the foundation was supporting his other interests, of course. He'd suggest a strategic partnership with a new vendor. I'd make it happen. But the scale, the offshore accounts, I hid that from him. I thought I was protecting him, protecting us. According to Eleanor, she was the true architect of the siphon's later, more aggressive stages. She'd done it out of a twisted love for the foundation and for Julian, the visionary she'd served for 30 years. When my audit was assigned, she panicked. She was the one who pressured their security consultant, a euphemism for a fixer she'd used before for discrete issues, to find out who the auditor was. She gave him my name. But I never wanted anyone hurt, she sobbed. I told him just to discourage him, to offer him a consulting fee to go away. That's all. Who is him, Eleanor? Ruiz asked, her voice lethally soft. Eleanor gave up a name, Martin Crow, a private investigator with a murky reputation. Ruiz and Miller tracked Crow to a bar in Tacoma. He was a big man, with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many dirty deeds. He didn't resist, and he wore a watch, a chunky, digital G-Shock with a bright orange bezel. In interrogation, Crow folded fast. He admitted to being the man in the van. Eleanor had paid him to assess the target's routine and find a pressure point. He'd cased my house, seen my walks, my solitude. He'd even, he confessed, picked the lock on my back door a week prior while I was out, just to get a feel for the layout. It was supposed to be intimidation, but then he said his instructions changed. The client got nervous, said the old man was too sharp, that he wouldn't scare. They said it had to be permanent, and it had to look like an accident. Who is they? Miller demanded. Eleanor Vance? Crow shook his head, a cynical smile on his face. She didn't have the stomach for it. The new instructions, the specifics, they came from a different number, a burner, but the money came from the same place. The Cayman account. He described the drop. A sealed medical cooler left in a park, containing a pre-filled syringe and a vial of clear liquid. The instructions were precise. Administer subcutaneously. Ensure the subject appears to have fallen post-injection. The payment was triple his usual fee. They pressed him on the voice on the burner phone. Calm, Crow said. Educated. New medical terms. Told me exactly where to inject to avoid major vessels. Said the drug would mimic a stroke. It was clinical. They had the hitter. They had the weapon. They had a partial chain of command leading back to the Foundation's money. But the final link, the voice on the phone, the mind that chose carfentanil, was still a ghost. The case was now a hall of mirrors. Julian Thorne, with his rock-solid alibi, was maybe a corrupt beneficiary, but not the would-be killer. Eleanor Vance was a guilty, desperate woman, but not the one who ordered the hit. Martin Crowe was the instrument, not the composer. The composition, the clinical precision of it all, pointed to one person. Dr. Eris Thorne visited me. It was a bold move. He came to the rehab facility, wearing a handsome wool coat over his scrubs, looking every inch the concerned, successful son. He brought a fancy fruit basket. He stood at the foot of my bed, his expression a masterpiece of professional sympathy and personal regret. Mr. Mercer, I cannot apologize enough for what you've endured, he said, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. My father's lapses have put you in the crosshairs of God knows who. I want you to know the family is fully cooperating. We want this person found. He asked detailed questions about my recovery, my nerve function, the specific antidotes used. It was a carbon copy of his initial concern, but now it felt different. Felt like a quality check. He was assessing his own work. Your expertise was a terrible thing to waste, he said, shaking his head. To think someone would use medicine, my own profession, to do this. When he left, the air in the room felt colder. I called Ruiz immediately. He just left. He was taking notes without a pen. I know, Ruiz said. She sounded tense, electric. We just got the warrant results for his finances, his phone, his hospital locker. And clean. Spotless. Too clean. His alibi for the attack window is also good. He was performing a scheduled coronary bypass. 3 nurses, 2 surgeons, and a heart-lung machine vouch for him. Another alibi. Another layer of insulation. But, Ruiz continued, and I could hear the lean in her voice, the hunter sensing a shift in the wind. We pulled his personal credit card statement. 6 months ago, he attended a 3-day wildlife veterinary pharmacology conference in Spokane. Carfentanil was a keynote topic. Its uses, its dangers. He has the professional knowledge, Frank. And we found something else. Eleanor Vance, in her statement, said she only gave my name to Crow. She didn't give him your address. Your home address isn't public record. It's shielded because of your old IRS work. I saw it. The missing variable snapped into place. Someone else had to provide it. Someone with a reason to access sealed records, or the means to get them. Bobby Kincaid had that access, Ruiz said. But he says he only gave them your name from the AG file. He swears he didn't give your address. I believe him. He was leaking information, not setting up a hit. Then who did? I asked, the pieces swirling. Who had a motive to see both you and Julian Thorne destroyed? Ruiz posed the question quietly. Who stood to inherit a damaged but salvageable empire if the brilliant, domineering father was taken out of the picture? And who had the medical knowledge to design the perfect, untraceable crime and the inside access, through his father's crumbling business, to the dirty money to pay for it? The spreadsheet in my mind finally balanced. The numbers hadn't pointed to the father protecting his kingdom. They pointed to the son, patiently orchestrating its controlled demolition, and removing the auditor who could have stopped him before the final demolition charge was set. He wasn't protecting his father's legacy. He was methodically burying it, and building his own on the rubble. And he'd tried to bury me with it. We had the motive. We had the means. Now we needed the one thing he hadn't planned for. A mistake. The mistake wasn't in the planning. It was in the personality. Dr. Aris Thorne was, by all accounts, a perfectionist. It's what made him a brilliant anesthesiologist. He controlled every variable: dosage, timing, the patient's physiological response. He approached his father's crisis the same way. But perfectionists have a flaw. They can't stand loose ends. They can't abide a messy, unresolved equation. And I was the ultimate loose end. Not dead. Awake. Talking. Ruiz's strategy was simple. Apply pressure and let his own need for control do the rest. She didn't arrest him. There wasn't enough. Instead, she made it plain he was the new focus. They re-interviewed his surgical team, not about his alibi, but about his behavior that day. Was he distracted? Did he take any unusual breaks? They subpoenaed his conference materials from Spokane. A forensic accountant started tracing the path of the consulting fee that had paid Crow, looking for any digital fingerprint, any intermediary that could be linked to Aris. They also went back to Martin Crow, the hitter, with a new angle. Ruiz showed him a lineup of photos, not of faces, but of watches, pens, and key fobs, items found in Aris's home and office. Crow's eyes lingered on a picture of a distinctive titanium pen. "The voice on the burner," he said, squinting. "When we met for the drop, I saw a hand. Gloved. But they used a pen like that to tap the instructions in the envelope. Fancy thing. Stuck in my head." It was another circumstantial grain of sand. But the pile was growing. The breaking point came from an unexpected quarter. The family. Ruiz, in a calculated move, brought Julian Thorne in again. Not as a suspect, but as a victim of a larger plot. She laid out the theory for him, carefully, watching the proud man's face as she explained how his own son might have been orchestrating his ruin, using the fraud he'd started as both the weapon and the smokescreen. Julian Thorne deflated. The outrage was gone, replaced by a cold, horrifying clarity. He was a man who understood leverage, betrayal, and long games. He sat in silence for a long minute. "My son," he finally said, his voice hollow, "has always resented the shadow I cast. He wanted the throne, but he never wanted to build the kingdom. Only to inherit it." He looked up at Ruiz, a decision hardening in his eyes. "Check his lake house. On Lopez Island. He bought it 2 years ago. Said it was an investment. He goes there alone. To think. He never lets the cleaners in. He handles everything himself." It was all Ruiz needed. She got the warrant. They found the lab. Not a sprawling thing, but a pristine, hidden setup in a sealed-off basement room. A small chemical fume hood. Precise digital scales. Vials, beakers, and a locked refrigerator. Inside the fridge, alongside legitimate medical samples, was a small vial labeled with a chemical serial number. Testing confirmed it. A concentrated solution of carfentanil citrate. The same analog found in my bloodstream. More importantly, they found the computer. It wasn't connected to the internet, but it contained files. Meticulous research on geriatric stroke symptoms. Pharmacological data sheets. And a folder labeled Contingency FM. Inside were photos of my house, downloaded from real estate sites. My daily schedule, pieced together from weeks of observation. It was a clinical case study for a murder. But the clincher was the Bitcoin wallet. The forensic techs, using sophisticated key recovery tools, found the encrypted partition holding the wallet's private keys. It was the other side of the curator wallet that had paid Bobby Kincaid. Aris Thorne wasn't just the medical mind. He was the bank. He'd been managing the entire covert operation from his isolated lake house, using his father's illicit cash flow to fund it. They arrested Dr. Aris Thorne as he left the hospital after a surgery. He was calm, serene even. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He simply said, "I'd like to speak to Detective Ruiz. And to Mr. Mercer. I believe I owe them both an explanation." Ruiz brought him to an interview room. She allowed me to be there behind the one-way glass in a wheelchair. I needed to see this. I needed to hear it. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table. He looked at Ruiz not with defiance, but with the weary satisfaction of a professor about to explain a complex theorem. "You understand the principle of a controlled demolition, detective?" he began. his voice calm, conversational. You identify the load-bearing structures. You place charges with precise timing. You bring the building down without damaging the foundations of the ones around it. That's all I was doing. He laid it out with chilling clarity. His father's fraud was the doomed building. My audit was the wrecking ball swinging too early, too clumsily. It would have caused a chaotic public collapse. Scandal, arrests, total ruin. I needed to redirect the force, he said. I needed to collapse the fraud and the man who built it in a way that left the underlying assets, the reputation, the network, the shell companies now under my control salvageable. My father in prison for attempted murder? A tragic fall from grace. The public can understand a crime of passion, of desperation. It's almost Shakespearean. The money would be frozen, tied up in his defense. I would step in to manage the remaining affairs. By the time the dust settled, everything would have been quietly transferred, retitled. A fresh start. He looked toward the mirror, as if he could see me. You were the complication, Mr. Mercer. You were the one variable my father never accounted for. A man who could see the architecture of the lie. You weren't a person to him. You were a risk. But to me, you were a tool. The perfect trigger. An attack on you, traced back to his money, would be the charge that brought his whole world down. It had to be you. And it had to look like he did it. So you hired Crow through your father's own illicit channels. Ruiz stated, keeping him on track. I utilized existing assets, Eris corrected. Eleanor's panic. Martin Crow's greed. My father's stolen money. I simply orchestrated them. The carfentanil was my signature. Clean, clinical solution. I calculated the dose for certain fatality. Your survival, Mr. Mercer. For the first time, a flicker of genuine professional irritation crossed his face. That was an statistical anomaly, a testament to your stubborn physiology. He showed no remorse for trying to kill me. In his mind, I was a necessary sacrifice in a greater engineering project. His father was the true target. I was just the most efficient mechanism. And the watch Crow saw? The pen? Ruiz asked. Eris allowed a small, disdainful smile. Sentimental carelessness. The watch was an old gift from my father. I wore it to the drop as a private joke. The pen is from my medical school. I must have used it without thinking. Perfection is a theoretical concept, detective. In practice, there is always entropy. They had it all. The confession. The physical evidence from the lake house. The digital trail. As they let him out, he paused near the window. He didn't look at me, but he spoke, his voice low enough that only Ruiz and I, listening closely, could hear. You should understand, Frank. May I call you Frank? This wasn't personal. It was fiscal. You were a liability on a balance sheet. My father created you as a liability. I simply managed your depreciation. Then he was gone, taken to a cell. The clinical architect of his father's ruin, and my near murder, had finally balanced his books. Behind the glass, I let out a long, slow breath. The numbers at last added up. The motive wasn't greed or panic. It was a cold, calculated coup. A son's patient, brilliant, and monstrous bid for a kingdom he deemed poorly managed. Using the king's own stolen gold to hire the assassin. The case was solved. But the taste in my mouth wasn't victory. It was the cold, metallic flavor of a human being who saw other human beings as variables in a spreadsheet. And that was a terror no amount of logic could ever fully quantify. The aftermath was a quiet unraveling, not a bang. The media circus, having feasted on Julian Thorne, now had to choke down a more complex and unsettling story. The son who engineered it all. Headlines shifted from philanthropist fiend to doctor of deceit. The narrative was no longer a simple morality play. It was a chilling study in patience and ice-cold ambition. Julian Thorne was indicted for the massive charity fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The evidence was irrefutable, but the solicitation for murder charges were dropped. In a final, bitter negotiation to avoid a life sentence, he agreed to testify against his son and to a full public restitution plan that would liquidate his remaining personal assets to repay the foundation. His empire wasn't just collapsed, It was being systematically dismantled to make whole the people he'd stolen from. His legacy was now an asterisk in a court docket. Eleanor Vance, broken by guilt and manipulated as a pawn, pleaded to lesser charges. She would see some prison time, but her cooperation and her genuine, if misplaced, loyalty to the institution spared her the worst. Martin Crowe, the hired hand, cut a deal. His testimony against Eris Thorne was the nail in the coffin. He'd do time, but not the kind that waits for men who kill for money. Bobby Kincaid, the leak, lost his job, his pension, and likely his son's respect. He pled guilty to bribery and misuse of public office. His sentence was lighter, but his life was forever stained by the knowledge that his desperation had set a killing machine in motion. I didn't hate him, pitied him. We all have our breaking points. His was just quantified in hospital bills. And Dr. Eris Thorne? He never wavered. He went to trial maintaining his eerie academic calm. His defense was a version of the truth. He was cleaning up his father's mess. The prosecution's mountain of evidence, the lab, the digital footprints, the financial trails, Crowe's testimony, made it a short deliberation. He was found guilty of attempted murder in the first degree, conspiracy, and a host of financial crimes. The judge, looking down at a man who showed not a shred of remorse, sentenced him to a term that meant he would likely never breathe free air again. As they led him away, he looked satisfied. He had controlled the narrative to the very end. He was the master of his own catastrophe. For me, the physical recovery was the easy part. The hip healed. The fog lifted. The poison was just a chemical, and chemicals can be overcome. It was the psychological audit that took longer. I moved out of the lake house. Too many quiet corners. Sarah helped me find a secure condo in the city, with a doorman and cameras everywhere. I didn't love it, but I slept through the night. Detective Sandra Ruiz and I kept in touch. She'd stop by for coffee sometimes. Not to talk about the case, but to talk about crosswords or the Mariners' lousy season. We'd become unlikely friends, bound by the shared experience of staring into that particular abyss. One afternoon, about a year after the trial ended, we were sitting in my new living room. The rain was sheeting down the windows, a classic Seattle gray. "You ever wonder?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "What would have happened if you just let it go? If you'd called the AG and said you found nothing?" I thought about it. I thought about it 100 times. Maybe Eris would have found another way to topple his father. Maybe he'd have succeeded without anyone noticing. Or maybe the whole rotten structure would have held for a few more years, until it collapsed on some other retiree doing a pro bono review. I shook my head. I couldn't have let it go, Sandra. The numbers were wrong. Once I saw it, I had to follow the column down. "It's who I am. It's who he counted on you being," she said quietly. "That's the hell of it. He used your nature as a weapon against you. He bet on you being thorough." "And he was right," I said. A long silence stretched between us, comfortable, filled with the sound of rain. "You know, in the end, he made one final miscalculation." Ruiz raised an eyebrow. "He thought because he understood the chemistry, the finances, the psychology, he controlled the whole equation," I said. "He forgot the human variable he couldn't quantify. Not my stubborn heart. His father's pride. When you presented Julian with the truth, that his own son saw him as a flawed structure to be demolished, that pride turned. It wasn't about saving himself anymore. It was about denying his son the victory. That's what gave us the lake house. That's what gave us the lab." Eris calculated for greed, fear, even loyalty. But he didn't calculate for a wounded king's spite. Ruiz gave a slow, acknowledging nod. "Justice doesn't always come from the good guys playing perfect. Sometimes it comes from the bad guys tripping over their own rotten wiring." I went back to work. Not for the AG. That chapter was closed. But I started volunteering with a nonprofit that advises small charities on financial governance, teaching them how to see the red flags, to build structures that are transparent. Turning my curse into a vaccine. Felt right. Some nights, when the condo is too quiet, I still feel it. Not the prick on the neck. That memory has faded. I feel the weight of the gaze. The knowledge that out there, in the world of clean hands and quiet voices, are people who see other people as entries on a ledger, assets and liabilities. But then I'll get a text from Sarah, a picture of my granddaughter. Or Ruiz will send me a truly awful crossword clue. Or I'll lose myself in the clean, honest numbers of a well-run community food bank. The balance sheet of my life, I've decided, won't be defined by the one man who tried to zero me out. It'll be tallied in the mornings I get to see, the puzzles I get to solve, and the small, certain knowledge that the column for truth always, eventually, outweighs the column for lies. It just sometimes takes a stubborn old bookkeeper to do the math. And with that, we come to the end of today's story. If you liked it, press the thumbs up. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next.